ain't gonna lie. This is gonna be a weird video. Hi, my name is Sydney. Welcome back to my channel. So I hope you're all enjoying your forced quarantine. I know I am. It's basically becoming the equivalent of Castaway. Except rather than Wilson and an island, I have my house. And annoying neighbors. So really, it's nothing like Castaway. Now, I asked everyone on Instagram if they wanted to see any more coronavirus content. And overwhelmingly, you guys said no. But a large portion of folks did tell me that they like hearing stories and anecdotes about my life, so I guess here we are. And what we're about to discuss in this video is actually something that I've wanted to say for a little while, but just never really found the right time. But I guess being stuck alone in my house while the apocalypse is happening outside has finally given me the opportunity. So, let's talk about gender relations and how not to be bitter and psycho. Hell yeah. Radical feminism is unquestionably responsible for a lot of anti-male sentiments. But for every fembot who has said that all men are rapists and pigs, there are men on the other side who think that all women are resource-stealing baby factories. I would know. I've watched anti-Sydney videos, and they genuinely terrify me. When I say Sydney, I mean me, not the city. Although that Sydney also is terrifying. But for the most part, when you sit back and start to observe what drives some of these narratives, you start to see a pattern. On the surface, a lot of these ideas appear to be grounded in pain, or at least in the repeated personal negative experiences with the opposite gender, or even growing up in a society that reinforces ideas that lead us to resenting one another. It's almost like pitting your kids against each other when it comes to sports or music or something. Or drawing between them constant unhelpful comparisons that cause them to grow up all twisted and angry. Your kid doesn't want to be David Beckham like his brother, he just wants to play soccer badly. Okay, Karen? And this divide even goes beyond the stereotypical criticisms that we have of one another, that all men are violent or all women are psychotic, or the 1,000 other mean things that we say about each other all the time. Beyond those criticisms, it's not uncommon to hear about men who have stopped interacting with and trusting women because their experiences with them have been profoundly negative. And vice versa, except, with women dating men. And this doesn't just happen exclusively in relationships. The resentment can grow from basically any interaction between the sexes. And some of those interactions are more nefarious than others, but ultimately, they result in the same twisted disdain that we see play out from both sides. A couple years ago, for example, a male friend of mine was Me Too'd. He told me recently that has had such an impact on him that he's now too uncomfortable and cynical to even be in any romantic situation with a woman. On the other side, I have female friends who've been sexually assaulted, or who've had repeated negative sexual experiences with men and now have this irreversible resentment and hatred towards them. And then there are just horrible people who act horrible because they are horrible. Like serial killers, or people who abuse animals, or Hillary Clinton, and Bill Clinton, and Harvey Weinstein. Thank you, Sydney. We get the picture. Now, all of that being said, it is possible to be damaged and scarred and still manage to not completely despise the opposite gender. And I know this on a personal level, which is what we're going to talk about today. So we're about to have a pity party. I love parties! Especially now that I know you can distill men's tears into alcohol. In the last little while, I participated in a video for a YouTube channel called Jubilee. The video was about the Me Too movement, and towards the end of it, much to my absolute horror, I got a little choked up discussing something that happened a few years ago.
Yeah, I mean, it's really funny because I'm over here I don't think things are on the same level, but things impact you in bizarre ways. But yeah, because the perpetrator wasn't white, and because he was I'm part of a certain religion, and the police were basically just we can't because of cultural differences, which I don't feel is such a great reason for throwing something out.
In my defense, I was super jet lagged. I had literally just flown in from Australia the day before. I was super tired, clearly had poor emotional control. If I was gonna have a pity party, there'd be more cake. Sydney, you can't just lure me into your videos with the promise of cake and then tell me that there's no cake. How am I supposed to be body positive if I'm not eating? Funnily enough, I'd actually discussed that specific event a couple years ago on Australian national TV. and I didn't cry once. And honestly, it's such a bizarre story that I'm even a little bit embarrassed to repeat it again. But basically, in essence, I was sexually assaulted or indecently assaulted on a flight a number of years ago. Which sounds completely ridiculous to absolutely everyone, but is actually much more common than you think, with other women around the world reporting similar stories. The problem with my case specifically was that, despite going to police in Australia, they essentially told me that the man would be let off because of cultural differences. Because some cultures around the world think it's okay to disrespect and hurt women, and apparently Australia's fine with that. Initially, I felt cheated, and then I felt angry, and then I wasn't just angry at men, but I was angry at everyone. Events like that have a profound impact on how you feel about the world and everyone in it. And to be clear, I am not saying for a second that my experience was the most horrific one out there. In fact, I know there are people out there, men and women, who've been through much, much worse. And while I'm definitely not into the idea of creating a hierarchy of who has suffered more, it's pretty clear that traumatic events affect everyone differently. But for me personally, I went through a very bizarre and unfortunate situation on a plane, landed in a foreign country, and then found that my second flight was grounded for 24 hours, which was pretty traumatic on top of everything that had already happened, because it was really the first time that I was traveling on my own. And when I eventually got where I was going, which was France, I ended up getting very sick, losing about 10 kilos, tapping out, and flying home. It wasn't the best time of my life, I'll be honest. Frankly, that was about enough adventuring for me, but in true Sydney style, I went and made things worse. Because about a month later, feeling pretty sad and sorry for myself and just wanting someone to lean on, I went and poured myself into a majorly abusive relationship that went on for almost 2 years. You know when you look back on really terrible relationships and you now wishes that you could talk to you then and just be like, this is one of those. But you know, hindsight is 20/20. Do you get it? It's 2020. No, Sydney, we get it. It's just not funny. That relationship was miserable. And over the years, I've really considered my role and my culpability in it all. I feel like a lot of people can relate to the doubt that starts to seep in after you've had years to consider the part that you played in events that negatively impacted you. To this day, there are things that happen that I still can't get past. Things I can't talk about and will probably never talk about because I'm ashamed and embarrassed. I spent almost 2 years in a situation that was controlling and physically and emotionally abusive, and when we eventually broke up, he harassed me so much that I decided to move to the UK. 'Cause when in doubt, move away. To England, where people think exercising is going on a run to the pub. And you get to see all this Roman history that you just won't appreciate at the time. Because you're dumb. Oh, Sydney, that looks like a fun thing to sit on. How did you not know that this is an insanely impressive historical landmark? At the time, moving was absolutely the right thing to do. I needed to get out of my environment because I could feel myself sinking into that depression sludge, where I was driving to work in the morning thinking, haha, I should just drive into the oncoming traffic. Which just quietly you shouldn't do. In fact, if you feel that way, I recommend seeking help or going to England and sitting on Hadrian's Wall. It's not a permanent fix, but at least you get to hang out with some sheep and hairy coos. So I spent a little while plodding around the UK, and as the hippies say, I did some soul searching. It did not look like this.
And the intrusions from above continue. That's true.
It looked more like this. So when I eventually went back to Australia, I really felt a lot better about things. And I'd managed to patch myself up enough to be a functional person. I enrolled in my master's program shortly after that, which led me here, complaining to all of you about some sad times in my life. I mean, it's kind of weird to think that me being traumatized on an airplane means I now get to talk about politics on the internet. What is that? It was a little while later that I came to find out that my ex-boyfriend had abused the girlfriend he had after me, and the girlfriend he had after that, and I estimate and dare say every girlfriend since. Frankly, I don't think people like that change. And I don't think that they're redeemable. I've gone through 20-something years of life logging lots of negative experiences with the opposite sex, some of which were definitely my fault, and others weren't. I've also had excellent positive experiences, and I'm really lucky that a lot of those men are still in my life today. And ultimately, they'll go on to marry women who I hope will realize the value of what they have. Being sexually assaulted and then immediately following it up with an abusive relationship has been impactful in the way I deal with people now. But life has also been characterized by other minor events that poked holes in my self-esteem, my trust, and overall understanding of how men and women should and shouldn't interact. But the thing is, my experiences are not even uncommon. We've all been there, and for better or worse, we make our way through it. Abuse and sexual assault puts a big hole in your trust. It casts doubt on all your relationships, your interactions, and even the opposite gender, and it leaves you feeling pretty angry, pretty resentful, and for some people, they self-destruct. It makes you ashamed, and it makes you embarrassed, and a lot of people carry that around with them. It spawns this irreversible victimhood mentality that means a lot of people feel that the opposite sex is their universal enemy. And the radical factions on both sides of this issue feed that. But it is possible to get past feeling that way. And I like to think I'm proof of that. Gold star for Sydney. Because here I am all these years later, and I realize that not all men will act this way. In fact, the vast majority of men find this behavior completely indefensible and disgusting. And the majority of men in my life are good people, great people, sometimes handsome people. The same goes for women. The majority of women think that other women who abuse their husbands or cheat the justice system, use their children as leverage, are abusive or act like psychos are also completely irredeemable. These rational, normal voices get drowned out by the absolute crazies on either side. And it's why we end up thinking that every person is as bad as our ex, or is as terrible as the person who assaulted our friend. And honestly, getting to this mindset of knowing that the opposite sex isn't the enemy can be difficult, because it's easier to get it twisted than to realize that one person's actions, or a few people's actions, shouldn't control and determine how you feel about everyone. Radical feminism and misogyny are built on the idea that the opposite sex is inherently bad. Many people arrive at this conclusion after exposure, whatever that looks like, to trauma at the hands of the opposite sex. And you know, maybe nothing can ever erase how sad you feel about your wife walking out on you. And maybe nothing can ever erase your anger at every boyfriend you've ever had cheating on you. But that doesn't make everyone bad. And it doesn't mean you've got to go through life feeling like that. I'm no expert, but I do know how it feels to want to be angry and to find a way not to be. Somehow, I hope that people will realize that you can actually take situations case by case, and that the opposite sex isn't your enemy. And maybe when that time comes, we might actually stand a much better chance of everyone getting along. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Sydney Watson. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. I'm just kidding. I could never do one of those. I don't know how to talk like a robot. But I am opening the floor to all of you. What do you all think? Is there a way to fix the relations between the sexes? Is getting over the inbuilt hostility that a lot of us have the way to doing that? And what do you generally make of this topic overall? As always, if you like the video, hit subscribe and the thumbs up button. If you want to leave a comment, feel free to do so. Just be respectful about it. And I will see you guys next time.